All right, we'll call it at 8:03 a.m. Get a little feedback from you, Nathan. We will start first with the assistant superintendent report. It's a bit until so our new business slides you shared. So Katie shared some slides on some of the transportation stuff earlier. I'll share the screen here, Nathan, just so you can look at the same stuff. I assume we just want to go through the slides.
Sure. Yeah. So John and I had talked about during these meetings being able to provide some information around the budget and just breaking it up into pieces and being able to go through each one of those pieces at our different meetings. And then taking that information that's shared and talked about in the meeting and then also posting it to the website as a way to not only share the information here, but share the information hopefully to the broader community, and then breaking it up into the pieces. Hopefully that helps so that when we get to the full budget conversation, we will already have talked about kind of the really important major areas or budget drivers that make up the operating budget. So the first piece that we'll review, I think is really is pretty relevant when it comes to the timing, because there's been a lot of feedback on transportation for this year. So it's just going to be an overview on transportation. So the first slide is just a general overview on what our obligation is for general education transportation, and our obligation is truly driven by Mass General Law. And so transportation is at the town's expense. It shall be provided to all the Milton students grade K through 6 who live 2 miles or more from the school that they attend. We also, in addition to our mandated obligation, we also provide fee-based transportation, which is an option for school bus services for students grades K through 6 who live less than the 2 miles, so who live closer to the school that they attend, and also for all students grades 7 through 12. And the 2 mile limit, this is the language that is set by the state, is the shortest distance using a commonly traveled vehicular route. So it's not cut throughs, it's not as the crow flies, between the nearest walkway to the student's residence and the nearest walkway or gateway leading to the front door of the school. So just to provide some information on the fee structure that we currently utilize here in Milton, this fee structure, or this fee is part of the conversation that we typically have in December and January when we're creating our fee, our list of fees. And so students in grades K through 6 living more than 2 miles, those are our mandated students, so there is no bus fee. Students in grades K through 6 living less than the 2 miles, and all students grades 7 through 12, we charge $325 per student with a family max of $650. So it's essentially charging for 2 students. Students who qualify for free or reduced lunch, they are not assessed a bus fee. And families, this is new, we just instituted this late fee this year. The fee was approved I believe this past January. So families that register after the transportation deadline, we assess a $50 late fee, and that's per family. And that's just to encourage our families to register on time. That really helps us operationally with creating the routes and getting all of the information in so that we can do all that work in a timely manner so we can communicate that out to our families.
And a quick question on the fee. So again, $325 or $650, that's for the year.
Mm-hmm.
We just from a billing perspective, is that just a one-time payment that families make?
Correct.
We don't charge them monthly.
Correct. It's a one-time payment, and the payment is due at registration. And so if a family registers but they don't pay, we'll hold that bus pass until we receive payment. And we try to work with the families if there's any needs or any if they may qualify for free or reduced, but they don't know that that is something that they can, the fee waiver that they can take advantage of. We really try to work with the families to make sure that, the student is, getting that bus pass if they need it.
And then if a family starts in August and then quits in December, said like, busing, there's no reimbursement for the remainder of the year.
Correct.
And then if the family leaves, and so somebody gets off the wait list and joins in December, is there a reduction? And it's still $325.
Still
Yeah.
$325,
Okay,
yeah.
that's what I thought.
For the deadline, is there a deadline at which you're sort of like to like even with the late fee, you just can't,
Mhm.
it doesn't make sense, or we've created groups or whatever, I mean, is there sort of a drop date, doesn't matter if you you just can't manage.
We try to accommodate all of the students the best that we possibly can. So we do continue, even if a family registers late, we do add them either to the wait list at the secondary level, because we do have an active wait list, or at the elementary level, if there is a spot on the bus, we do our best to try to accommodate them, knowing that, in some instances, we may not be able to change a route, so we can accommodate that family, but they have to go on an existing route, so they may have to potentially walk to get to the bus stop. And there may be some timing implications, so if a family registers after the deadline, we can't just automatically assign them to the bus the next day, so we tried to this year, and I think moving forward, we really have to be very careful about making changes too close to the start of school, because that's when miscommunication happens, and that's when students potentially get on the wrong bus, which can become scary and dangerous for those families. And so we try our best to accommodate everyone, just knowing that we have to be kind of mindful of the timing and just making sure that all of the students are safe. And we want the drivers to know really their kids, who's on the bus and what the routes are.
I have one other question. So if you're on a wait list, say you got 2 kids, you pay the fee, at what point does the fee get reimbursed? You know, if you're number 112 on the list, like, is there, I guess, is it held through the, like, what's the timing for that, for return?
Typically around December,
Okay,
that's when we know that the routes are well established, the ridership is well established. And if we still have families on the wait list at that point, we start reaching out to the families. And the families can certainly at any time, if they found alternative transportation, they can always reach out to us for a refund as well. But it's usually around December that we start issuing refunds.
Questions?
So this is just some comparison data so that you can see, compared to our fees that we're charging, what some of the other school districts are charging. So we took some information from geographical comps. These aren't our comps that are assigned to us by the state. These are just more of districts in the area. So this is just some more information just for context. And this information is also, I put some bulleted items of where to find more information about transportation. And all of this comparable data is also in the FAQ document. So let's see. So as far as the budget is concerned, the general education transportation budget, the original FY 26 budget, the net budget was $733,000. Because we are in year 1 of the bus contract, the rate that we actually signed in the bus contract was higher than the original rate that we had put into the budget, so we did need to make an adjustment to the budget for FY 26. So on the top section here, you can see the FY 26 adjusted budget, that's the gross number, so that's the total number. That we're charged for transportation. And then you can see the $235,000 revenue offset, that is the revenue that we receive from charging that bus fee. And so the FY 26 net budget, that's the updated budget. It's $840,597. And so the breakdown is shown on this slide, the cost for the 11 buses, the cost per year. We're also charged a fuel surcharge. You can see the user fees that we collect. So the net cost per year for the 11 buses is the 840 number, and then that's broken down as a net cost per bus. So it's approximately $76,000.
Can I just clarify something, because this will be watched by folks as well?
Sure.
So what that last number means is that after we include the fees that folks pay, it
Yes,
still costs the district $76,415 per bus,
correct.
even after folks pay. So that's probably about 20% of the bus is paid by fee, 80% is paid by the operating budget, despite the large fee.
Yes,
Let's clarify, so for FY 26, the actual expenditure, that was for 12 buses.
FY 20.
I mean, 25 was
yes.
for 12 buses.
And that actual expenditure is a net number, so that doesn't include the
reduction.
200 and however much we used from the revolving fund, which is that fee revenue that we put in.
And so the 20% by the fees doesn't pay for the whole bus, obviously. So that was one of the questions that we got. So we want to make sure folks know that if we just escalate the fees a little bit, or if we add a bus and refill it, that's only 20% of the bus cost.
Correct.
But it's still a big 20%. So the fees are really important to make this work. But it just doesn't self-fund itself for a bus to be added.
And then just a note on here, we also provide transportation services to some of the private schools in Milton. And that's for students K through 6.
And that's by law.
Correct.
So St. Mary's, St. Agatha's, we have to provide transportation to those students.
Correct.
So we do not receive income. For those.
Correct.
Can't charge.
That's correct. Yeah.
But it's sort of the same criteria.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Nathan's-
Nathan,
Yes, thank you. Katie, a clarifying question here on extracurriculars and field trips. Are the costs, are we spending this $1 million on 11 buses and we get to sort of use them as much as we want? Or is this $1 million specifically for transport to and from school, and then anything else is additive on top of that?
Yes, so anything else would be an additional charge. It's all of the rates fall under the transportation contract, but athletic transportation is separate, that's budgeted separately. Field trips are separate, and that's typically, we do not have a budget for field trip transportation. So that's typically funded by PTO or outside organizations. Extracurricular is similar as well. That's additional and funded and would be funded in a way outside of this regular bus.
Thank you. Are those rates also negotiated in our contract?
Those rates are defined in the contract,
Defined in
yes.
the-
So in the rate, the cost per day for the 11 buses, that $533, we run our transportation is a 3-tier system, meaning that we run the middle school, high school, that's 1 tier. Cunningham Collycott is the second, and then Tucker Glover is the third. So that cost just incorporates all 3 of those tiers.
Got it. Thank you.
I have some other questions on this one. I'm happy to continue. Practice. Any other questions?
So for FY 26, the transportation budget, which funds 11 buses, is able to support transportation for almost 800 elementary students. And again, our elementary students are broken up into 2 tiers. It's Cunningham Polycott is our 2nd tier, and our 3rd tier is Glover Tucker. And then transportation for 509 Pierce and high school students, so secondary students. So for FY 26, we currently have 116 secondary students on the wait list for transportation. 84 of those students were registered during the initial registration period. However, the buses were at capacity. And our buses just can't accommodate all of the students that expressed that they were interested in receiving transportation. We also had a number of students that registered after the initial registration period, and again, they are on the wait list. And then we've only had 3 students that were waitlisted and have requested to receive a refund, which essentially is unenrolling them for transportation. Some of the considerations for fiscal year 27, as we look to start the budget building process. One of the considerations I think that we need to take into account is enrollment, specifically enrollment at the secondary level. So our enrollment has increased historically, and it is continuing to increase. However, our transportation capacity has largely remained the same. And even this year, we went from the 12 buses to the 11 buses this year. So I think that's just something to consider as we talk about building the budget for fiscal year 27, looking at what our proposed enrollment will be at the secondary level for school year 27, and then seeing if we were to be able to accommodate some of those students that are on the wait list, how many buses would that require? And how much would that essentially, what additional cost would that be? And then also just looking at some of the quality of service. So many of, some of the feedback that we've received from community members and from families and guardians has been just feedback around the timing of the bus routes and schedule, some of the communication from around the bus routes, some of the safety of the stops, just some of the different areas in town, just being mindful of the safety of when we try to create the bus routes. The bus company, and we partner with the bus company in looking at those routes, and they truly are trying to find efficiencies to make sure that the buses can run on time, but with those efficiencies, sometimes in trying to do so, there in some instances is a sacrifice for safety, and that's not something that we're willing to do. So there was an update this year that put one of the routes on a street that is just not safe to have our students picked up. And so we adjusted that, and we adjusted that back to a route that was familiar to our families last year. And so I think those are all just pieces of what we need to consider when we're looking at transportation. And when we consider those, we also have to be mindful that there's budget impacts to many of the changes that we make. So that's just the reason that I think it's an important note to make, and that we just need to continuously consider that as we talk about the budget for future fiscal years.
Nathan?
Yeah, thank you. Katie, this is really useful to look at and hear you talk through. I think, I think it would be good for us as a school committee and to hear from you all as management, not necessarily today, but as we plan for next year's budget, you know, right now, my back of the envelope math says we're able to provide bus transport for about 90% of students who want it. And it seems like about 30%, 35% of students in district want transportation. Um, do we have a sort of philosophy as to what percentage of our students who need bus transportation we want to be able to provide? And what would it cost to get there? Maybe it's 100%. Maybe it's not, maybe it's more than 90, but not quite 100%. I think it would be good to norm around that so that we can, um, it feels like with this, and this is not any, like, this is just the outcome of a tight budget. The tail is wagging the dog a little bit. Like, we have this amount of money so we can provide this much transportation to people, as opposed to saying we want to be able to provide, our goal is X amount of transportation, how much will that cost? I think it would be useful to model that out for next year so that we can just know what those parameters are going in. Whether we can afford to provide it is obviously a different question.
Mhm. And that was part of the conversation that we had last year, when we had talked about the budget and what were some of the needs kind of above that level service. Having the 12 buses last year and saying, you know, obviously with the level service, being able to maintain that number. And then with the additions that we had talked about above and beyond level service, saying if we could add one more bus, that would be able to hopefully accommodate all of the students that were looking to receive transportation. And so unfortunately, we went from we really would like to have 13 to now we're back to the 11. So
Can I just say that out loud, because I wasn't here for that, so you're saying that that assessment kind of was done last year, and 13 seems to be the number that would, to your point, Nathan, rise the percentage access rate to above a 90%. So the general goal is 13 buses would accommodate the highest percentage of students.
yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Always just taking into account, like looking at those trends in enrollment, because the 13 we were thinking for this year, but certainly I think that it would be safe to say that the 13 would probably be appropriate for next year too, but we would just have to look at that data one more time before we kind of made that assessment.
In the other part of that in the planning is not just how many buses, but to what especially for your middle school and high school students, do we want to create any zones where we don't provide busing, right? So do we want to push out that distance and say we have to take care of the farthest folks first and then work it in this way? So we're going to draw a line around the high school, around Pierce. Are we just not going to provide any busing for a certain distance, whether folks want to pay for it or not, as a way to start that process from the furthest point in? We received calls from our folks who live in East Milton who didn't get in the lottery, and they're our father students. And then we have some families who live on Reedsdale or Brook Road that might be quasi within walking distance of a mile, who have had the history of getting a bus at a certain distance. So just looking at that as part of what does 100% access mean, and for who, and what are the rules around it? Because then you also will be, from a financial perspective, if you go for 100% and you don't have any limit on distance, you could have buses that are a third or 40% filled, and now, so it's definitely a delicate balance of trying to find out that. And I really want to say thank you to Katie, because of all the emails that she is returning in the FAQs and the communication. And I appreciate her putting the quality of service down. We have to have that conversation about what that looks like and how we can do better at that. But then what does it mean financially, and how do we overlay that larger conversation? So I'm glad that you already did some of the legwork last year So we can just resurface that and start to have a conversation for FY 27.
Is there also the opportunity, and again, this would be within timeframe of discussing it, but recognizing that are there other ways to think about it, for example, and maybe I like the idea of like the radius thought and then the furthest ones out, but similarly, if say 13 was cost prohibitive, just giving an example, are there options where you could explore an alternative, like a single stop where kids can get to that's further out, that's a lack of a better term, a shuttle bus or a single bus that's not making multiple stops, if that was similarly like on the two furthest points of town, or, you know, and then I think another thing maybe is, and obviously it's not appropriate for everyone, but being able to communicate some of the public transportation options that maybe for some people are more accessible, that you say, you know, in the beginning of the year, you can sign up for this if you live in this area, you know, this bus route is accessible and might be an option as well. I think especially for families, if you're playing sports or you have activities and it's more sporadic use. Just not saying that we don't, it's not saying that we don't fund it, but also just saying to families, here are other options as you're considering the bus, you know, that might make sense as well. So I don't know, I just think it's obviously there's that big budget number for the buses, but then how else can we think about it in a way that recognizes that there's that financial challenge?
The buses, I think it is somewhat tricky because we base the registration based off of who registers and the number of seats that are available. And when we're registering the students, we're essentially assuming that everyone is taking the bus every single day.
Right.
And we know that in many instances, that's not necessarily the case. And so we have, at the secondary level, we try to register enough students that it's 2 students per seat because they can't sit comfortably having 3 per seat. But at sometimes at the secondary level, not everyone is always taking the bus, so sometimes we'll go a little bit over that capacity. So if that capacity is 50, sometimes we'll register up to 52 because we know not every single student. It's just, it's difficult to measure because you may have a day that all 52 say, oh, it's raining out, I don't have sports today and I need a ride home, so I'm gonna hop on the bus. So it's just, it's a really tricky balance to figure out what is like the ideal number that we're accommodating on these routes. And I know it's frustrating to some families because sometimes they'll see a bus and say, well, it doesn't look like the bus is full. Why can't I come off of the wait list? So I know that's really frustrating to families and I've definitely heard that feedback. So I just want to be clear that we are just trying to register knowing that the students that are registered do have access, and there may be some instances where all of the students are utilizing transportation. So that's just another kind of like complexity of when we talk about the routes and the correct number of buses. That's something that we also consider.
I also noticed one of the districts, that in Dedham doing an AM or PM only. And then I know that there's a complexity. I don't know if that just like creates a whole crazy.
So that there have been times in Milton where we were AM, PM, you could buy a half pass for the morning, or you could buy a half pass for the afternoon. And there were times when we tried to, make it seasonal for us high school students because they may have played a sport during a certain season. And what happened over time is when you provide that much choice, you end up having real deficiencies in how you can deliver that service and how much actually behind the scenes you can actually dedicate time to actually surgically make sure that that's all working out. And so that's why those things slowly faded out. There were ideas that people had that felt like they could work. You pilot them for a couple of years and then you experience the challenges of that. The same for what we would call a shuttle bus. We used to do a shuttle bus to East Milton Square where children used to be able to just come to the Rotors. And then they'd all get dropped off in the food center parking lot. Kids would walk up to the front of the bus would pick them up and come. But you can't do that for your grade 6 students who go to the middle school. Because you have to pick them up, and they have to be picked up a certain distance from their house by law. So all of a sudden, that becomes a little bit of a
Yeah.
variable. So we have tried those things, and they have worked for certain periods of time when there was excessive enrollment. But that only serves one circle of our work, right? So that's just the first circle.
Right,
That means you're expending that money for a bus just for middle school, high school. They're not servicing they're not servicing the other 2 routes.
Okay.
So you're trying to it's definitely a balance, and if we want to expend more to make sure, to Nathan's point, that we're just focusing on the percentage that have access and use, that's one conversation, and then when you layer over cost and efficiency over the course of the 3 routes that we do, you're gonna start to find that that's gonna drop dramatically. And at some point, you're gonna add a bus in, and it's gonna be not cost effective, despite the fact that there might be 8 families out there that say, I still need access to the bus, and that just might be the cost of doing business, which right now, I'm sure a lot of families are saying that, and I respect that, so. But there are different ways to do it, but we should be sure to reflect on what were the pros and cons of those
Yeah.
Alternative ways of doing it before we move forward.
absolutely.
And one alternative of adding more students to a bus, because you do have fluctuations before school, after school, kids being out sick. You could be on that bus that has a majority of 6th and 7th graders, that could be 3 in a seat. And then all of a sudden, but you could be on the bus route that was majority high school kids that are bringing in cross bags, field hockey bags, and you can barely get 1 person a seat. So all of a sudden you have people standing. So there's definitely
Yeah.
fluctuation that you're gonna try to maximize, but there's a reality of what it could look like. That could change bus by bus, just by the nature of who's on it and who's riding it. And this is mainly a middle school, high school thing, and the elementaries are good.
Well, I think having the history is helpful to know as well, sort of, as these things come up.
In bike racks, Katie's running a grant for bike racks. I know it sounds like a small thing, but I think encouraging students to bike to school within a certain distance, they can do so in a safe way. Katie's looking into a safe to school grant for that. Again, that doesn't help the person who lives in East Milton Square right now. We understand that. That's why we're hoping the bus passes from the MBTA will help. But anybody who's a bike rider away, if we can get and make biking a different option for folks, that I think is a really healthy one. Walking and biking to school and then coming in for breakfast is a really big deal. And the other option that Katie is exploring with the middle school is asking Principal Bill Fish to find a staff member that we can pay to open the school earlier. So if parents have to drive their child earlier to school in order to drop off and make that commute happen, that they have a place for the child to go that's not outside the building because the school's not open yet. That's something that we are floating right now. Bill's working on identifying staff, and that would be a cost to the district, but it would be worthwhile. So if I can actually drop my child at 7:05 and make it to work, then that's a remedy that might help X amount of families out there in the waiting. So we are exploring things that are, connected to this issue that might be helpful for the folks in our wait list. And Katie's exploring all those with a lot of effort. So thank you very much for doing so.
Just want to do the last slide.
So just areas for more information, we did provide an FAQ document that was sent to our families on the wait list, but that's also on the transportation website. There's a button that you can hit, and it provides some of the information to questions that we've received. And then if there's any questions specific to bus routes, bus timing, there is an email to reach out to. We do have an app. The bus company has not updated the app yet for this year, and what that application does is it allows families to track the bus that their student is assigned to see where the bus is and to get a better sense of the timing. That app still needs to be updated with the information from this year, so we've reached out to the transportation company a few times to ask them kind of about the timing of when the app will be updated, because I know our families do depend on that in some ways to figure out the timing for the morning and the afternoon. And I know our schools use it as well, just to make sure that the students and the timing of the buses are all working. in the way that they should be, so that is, the app information is listed on the transportation website, it's just not, it's not updated, like I said, so we hope to have that updated as soon as possible, so our families can start using that.
It's great. And I like going back to some of your numbers, can I just go through a couple things and share my screen?
Mhm.
Which one you got? Okay. Let's see if I can share my screen. Went a few places that Nathan was going to, and again, really appreciate all the data. It was very interesting. So just a couple things as I'm taking away, I want to make sure that's right. And I think, Sean, this is a little bit to your point, like the fees are really important, but they, based upon kind of the numbers you shared, out of the $1 million costs for transportation, 235, that's covers 22%. So, you know, I think I've heard from residents around like, what we pay for this, we pay for costs, and it's like, again, it pays for less than a quarter of the costs is the fees, because a lot of this is mandated, that makes sense, and the ability to separate out what is the cost of mandated versus non-mandated, because we use the same vehicles, is really difficult to do. Kind of thinking total ridership information, one thing I was looking at is, again, you talked about the 3 tiers, so if this tier division is equal, which I'm sure it's not exactly equal, it's about 435 per tier. Across 11 buses, about 40 kids per bus, right? So that's about our ridership, what we're able to accommodate per bus, it seems like. This is a bit to your point, Nathan, in terms of the percentage, looks like we're supporting 80% of high school, middle school demand, given the total demand and the number of current riders, right? That's the math there. So again, but I think your question's a good one, Nathan, of like, what do we want to do? As we talked about, I know the school committee, the goal was to meet the full demand, and that was the goal within the needs-based budget last year. We were just not able to kind of push that through. So that's the current information.
The number I came up with, Mark, was, that's right. And once you add in, I was just thinking about the total ridership, including elementary school, which brings it up above 90%.
Yeah. Yeah, I think elementary school, we're at 100%. We have no wait list students.
We do not
in
have a
elementary
wait list
school.
at elementary school.
So,
Yeah.
100% satisfaction then.
Mhm.
So this is the cost piece, is the piece, obviously, again, the demand is, there's a request from families on like, how do we get, can we get another bus? Can we meet this demand? So I was trying to figure that out. So total user fees, cost per users. So right now it looks like we have about 720 paid users that are kind of within the district. So that's about half of the total number of riders are paid users, a little over half. And then I was trying to figure out the cost per bus, taking out the fees that offset it, right? You said $533.13 per bus, 180 days. So this is the cost per bus, not taking in any fees. So we were just to do this, $95,000. We created that and assumed we could get another bus to help this wait list. I think last year when we added that extra bus, it only served an extra 30 kids. I think that's information you shared previously.
I think when the bus was added, it was added for just the secondary level, not the elementary level. And I believe it was, we tried to fill it to that capacity, so it was around 47 students.
Okay.
We still have
It was still the wait list.
And we still had a wait list.
Correct.
So I did a simple math of like, okay, assuming the average number of kids on the bus is about this 39.5, what would the cost be if we just tried to create a bus? We're saying the cost to each of those families would be, 9 times what we're currently asking every other family to pay. So again, I was hopeful that we could figure out some way, like, can we just tell families, hey, we can get a bus if all of you just agree to pay this higher amount. Higher amount is so much significantly higher. I don't know how again, I guess in my mind, it's a question like, do we still share that and say like, hey, if 30 and this number obviously changes if we have less demand, right? do we say like, would you be interested in spending around $3,000 for the year to get a bus? That feels a little inequitable because you missed out on the lottery. Everybody else paying $325, you're paying $3,000. But this is the only financial way in which we could afford to add another bus without negatively impacting other parts of the school's budget, right? Without reducing it elsewhere. So I don't know, that's just a thought I want to throw out, at least to like give them the option to say like, this is what it would actually cost for the family to say, we pay for the bus, that covers the cost. We should get the bus. Like, well, it doesn't, it's only 22%. To pay for the full cost, you need to sign a check for $3,200 for the year, and we need at least 30 families to do that. And then if that happened, have enough money as a district to be able to provide an extra bus.
And then I just want to clarify,
Please.
too, on the wait list, we have some families, so it's multiple students. So if that's an estimated cost per rider for those families, it could be, for
Yeah.
some families, there's 2 or 3 students,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think that's just so significant.
Yeah, that's huge.
A couple of things to point out. One is that when people are looking at this, the average rider per bus is that's such a low number because of some of our elementary buses are fully subscribed because we provide everything. So our high school buses are full.
Full,
So they
yeah.
can look into whether or not people are both morning and the night. The offering of this, first and foremost, this exercise just demonstrates to the public that the $350 that you normally pay just wouldn't fund a bus. And when folks are coming up with this idea that they might be able to fund it themselves, that would be the cost. From a very broad view of this. The reality of that would be that you'd have to, that this sets up the district for a lot of access issues that public schools always avoid in terms of best practice. The AP class is 32 students. Why can't I just add 3 more kids to make it 36? Why don't we get together and pay the salary for that teacher? That's against the law. Jimmy, you can't fund it.
Yeah.
So funding the operating budget in a way with private funds in order to have some folks have access to something and some not, or even having folks have a fee that's larger than not, just from an equitable standpoint, it just is inherently concerning. So this exercise is great to answer the question, what would it cost, right? Roughly 3,000 per student if we got all of them together. And if the bus could hit every single one of those 30 houses and get to school on time.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So just to remind the public that there's so many layers to this that if we, you know, the goal would be to everybody's full understanding of the school committee that they did the work last year. We have an ideal number of buses that we would like to fund. That number is either 12 or 13, depending on the ridership. That's going to cost a certain amount of money. And that there's some issues that we might be, some pieces that we might be able to shift. Maybe the rate goes up a little bit. Maybe we have to reduce something else in the budget if this is the importance of this bus service for next year. And communicate well at the beginning of the year to make sure that everybody knows what the drill is. I'm sure the district over the last 15 years have always had a wait list of a certain amount. So re-examining those variables and talking about that. But I think adding a fee that would be different from independent upon a certain set of circumstances would be a problematic road to go down.
Nathan?
Not to be the Debbie Downer on the subject.
No, I completely agree with you, John and Mark. I'm glad you did this analysis. I was having a conversation with a community member yesterday where I ballparked it at 2,500, and that was even low. The other factor, obviously this is basically an intellectual exercise, is that the waitlisted students, I assume, are somewhat randomly distributed around Milton. And so to build a bus route for those students would be, you know, we would have students getting on the bus at 5:45 in the morning, probably. But I think for next year, and John, sorry, I broke up for a second, so I don't know if you were saying this. I think we should experiment or model out at least what a higher bus fee looks like. That's more than $325, but less than $3,200. And what that provides. My guess is even doubling it would probably not, doubling it for every fee payer might not get us exactly what we need. But it would get us somewhere. And we should just explore that using this year's data and see what happens for next year. And you know, I don't know what the community appetite is for that. I don't know how many riders we would potentially lose by raising fees, but it would be worth at least doing our homework on that.
I completely agree, Nathan. I was just trying to like model this out. So if we say the cost of the bus is this 96,000. If we then take that cost and say, all right, instead of these 39 people doing it and it being $2,400 per student, per rider. Like if we split this across everybody, right, all our estimated pay users, the 323 plus these extra people. Then it looks like what you would need to do to increase the fee to add one more bus. Again, so increase the cost for every family would be an extra $125. That still would, you know, leave us with a wait list of 70 kids. So to add 2 buses, right, is obviously would be more. But yeah, I agree with you. I think we could do some of that math and see where does, you know, where would a $450 user fee and a $900 family fee fit within kind of the other data, obviously you've already collected. Sure, honestly.
Based on.
Yeah,
Because
and
it
like that's
definitely-
$900, you know, that's a big jump from 600, whatever current cap is.
In the other part of this is that we're assuming that all the other parts of the budget are stagnant.
Yeah.
So not, so
Right.
if we're looking at the FY 27 budget in its totality, there's no home runs in this. If there was a home run, the district would have thought of it years ago, right? So
Yep.
the reality is that this is a series of base hits that if this is important enough to the community, which it is right now and may continue to be, then it's a series of smaller incremental steps of incremental increases in user fee and finding something else in the budget that we may need to do without and putting it aside and then evaluating that. And so I think that that's our job for FY 27 is doing that, not only for transportation, but how we support the whole district. You know, what are the priorities of the district? What are the funding priorities? And if transportation rises up that ladder for at least one more bus to get to the point where we're servicing a higher percentage of our families, then that's where we would sit because it's going to come at the expense of something else. And that will be another service that folks or some folks won't have access to. And that's fine. That's the hard conversation that we have to have every year. Are we flexibly addressing the needs of all of our families and students in a way that supports them in school? And so we've already demonstrated that we're going without 9 positions this year.
Yep.
In order to make sure that we have enough money to actually, when you look at the transportation number that Katie offered earlier, some of the dollars that we saved this year are going towards that little add to the budget to make this right size for this year. Like, you know, 840 to 733, that's the number, correct?
Correct.
So we've already supplemented with that 920,000 that we saved, the delta between 840 and 30, that's $100,000. You know, so we would have been 100 short for buses this year if we didn't do that kind of due diligence at the beginning of this year. So there's room to have those conversations and we'll find out what the appetite is for reducing certain positions and reallocating those dollars to the things that the town feels they need. And what we feel as educators is most important for students to access school and get what they need, and for the school committee to decide what they feel they want to make those moves on.
I just have one more thing, which is more around the MBTA part of the conversation, which I think is an important one of how we leverage that, right? I think it's something share with committee members. I was trying to investigate like where it seemed like we have actually the least support for families who aren't able to get a school bus out. You know, we have some MBTA access, it's not great within the town. I know we've talked about East Milton Square. Again, East Milton Square, as I can see it, has some of the best, you know, access through the MBTA of anywhere within town. Even some places that are closer are like, you know, they really don't have much ability to kind of get on any other bus. I mean, I guess they took the 217 down here and then switch over. I'm not quite sure of all the transfer things, but I'm especially thinking about kind of the west side of town where they have nothing that goes that they have to go up to then come back down. You know, they gotta make a transfer.
But that was my question. So the other one is do we have access to anything for the back for Brockton? Because Brockton comes up Randolph Ave and it comes up Canton Ave, 716. That was the one question I had. I don't know if they are like a.
Yeah, would have to look into the bad more. I only have what is obviously on this.
Yeah, I remember if you click, so I went onto the BAT site and that just might be something to look into because there are a number of stops along Randolph and there are a number of stops along Canton Ave.
Mm.
That come in that bring you to Pink Square, so. That is, you know, and if it's going along Blue Hill, it gets you towards.
Yeah.
Can't have gets you towards, which I think it's just another piece to
Yeah.
think about, because I was trying to figure out those two, I saw, you know, you mentioned
Yeah.
that west side of town. If there is something near there, because a lot of it too, they're trying to support like there's some of that for the Curry students.
Yeah, and obviously that both the red line goes right near here, so it's the 40. The high school is a bit more about, they have to get up and kind of walk up. So I mean, one thing I was wondering, I don't know if we have any relationship in BTA. I know in Boston, certain high schools during the school year, BTA does an adjusted route to get those high school kids to Boston Latin School, right?
Right.
Mike does this, you know, a special stop for that. I don't know if there's enough demand that MBTA would be interested. I don't know what that is in terms of like being able to say, hey, can you actually do a quick turnaround stop here on the 245 or the, you know, whatever the route that leaves at 6:30, except whatever, you know, whatever time it would need to leave in order to make it to the school on time. But, you know, I don't know if we have a contact with the MBTA to leverage that, because I think the points around, you know, removing cars off the road is a good one, the environmental impact, and being able to leverage an existing public infrastructure that isn't then a further operational cost demand on the district. Would be great.
I think this demonstrates like everything's not a home run, right? So East Milton does have access to a bus. And the kids used to take it all the time, a long time ago. I don't know why it goes in and out of favor. That you can get to the library and walk up to go to the high school. We did try to change that bus stop a long time ago. It is an arduous process for a suburban district to make those kind of shifts, because we didn't meet with success, put it that way. And that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
But for your middle school and high school students have to walk from the library. That's not a bad walk on a regular day. And it's also a lot better than any alternative of having to drive your child all the way up. And then the middle school students really have a nice spot of getting dropped off at the intersection. Again, there's crossing guards at both of those spots. So for the morning and the afternoon, that's definitely an access point for our East Milton and Cunningham Park area folks. We don't have any information about the BAT in Randolph Ave. We can explore that to find out how they do bus passes. Do they even do that? I'm not sure if they do. They're not affiliated in the same way with the MBTA as we normally get the bus passes from just the MBTA. In coming back towards the other side of town, the Brook Road side, you can have access coming back with the 245. Coming in the same way. So if you were on the end, I do see a lot of the peer students walking down from that area of town all the time, you know, walking in, so that's not a bad walk. So again, I think that the real hardship is that folks that are up Randolph Ave, that's a neighborhood that's just hard to access.
Yeah.
And it's a Randolph Ave is a the state highway. It's a really busy road. It's an awful road.
Yeah.
So how that works for kids is different than how it works for adults. And again, we're really about middle high school students at this point.
Yeah, Nathan.
Just a quick comment on the 245. It's important to note that this bus runs very infrequently. There is a bus in the morning at like right at 7 o'clock, which will get students over to the other side of town, you know, it runs quickly when it runs. And then in the afternoon, I think there's a bus at like 4:30 coming back from the secondary school area. And that's it. So I think it runs in both directions like 5 times a day.
Yeah, that's great context, Nathan.
The other ones, I don't know. I almost rode the bus to like see what it was actually like at 7 o'clock in the morning. I don't know how full it is.
Really appreciate all the information you're able to provide in our information, Katie, and John as well. So it seems like y'all are continuing to communicate with families, again, sharing that kind of email bus@milton.org. And then this is further context that we'll just need to talk through within the budget season. And that will obviously
Mhm.
depend on townwide revenue forecasts and expected operational increases in other areas. What we could take on the transportation, if anything, additional.
And can I ask like just one last comment? Katie is the assistant superintendent for finance. And this is a part of her role. And then we have a part-time person
Mhm.
who does the handling of this. This is the busy time of the season, right? From May of collecting all the money in the passes and just making sure the routes work, and then it settles down a little bit. So it's a seasonal role. But there is no transportation department in a district this size, right? This is a certain percentage of Katie's work that's high right now because of the seasonality of it. And then it will go back down. And then this person who's part-time has the same kind of fluctuation where this is a high season for her. But just for the families out there, that we do not have a transportation department as much as we have, several people who have this as part of their job that they are trying to facilitate. And that's very consistent with how other districts do it for the most part, which makes it a challenge for all the other pieces that this is not their only focus every day.
John, one quick comment on that. I actually learned that through this process. The school website, the district website says that there is a transportation department. And it may just be, it's a minor thing, but it might be sending mixed signals to the community. We might just want to update that nomenclature a little bit.
Yeah, we don't know what else to call it because we don't want to say it's a person because it's not even a person.
Right.
It's an email box that both Katie and the other person are accountable to and connect with. But there's no one just doing transportation in the district. And so, yeah, I agree that the people it gives the impression that there's 3 people working on this all day.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
That's just not accurate. So I agree. We'll take a look at that on the website.
The other thing that just concerns me around us, expand service next year is the expected, the contracts.
Mhm.
First student was 5% increase a year. They were the only bidder, so that's the best.
So year 2 will be more expensive.
So yeah, year 2 is gonna be
Yeah.
5% more, so unless the school's allocation, operationally speaking, exceeds, right, not just the 5% needed, but then adding another bus, so that 96,000 plus an extra 5%.
Right.
Um,
Mhm.
you know, it is transportation is really costly. It was a 13% increase this year.
Mhm.
So and then it's 5, and then the option years are 6 and 6. So it's not getting cheap anytime soon. And that's, I don't think, I know that is not unique to Milton.
Mhm.
What a challenge that all school districts are having.
And what you also see is some districts that have over time decided to only transport students via bus that they're legally obligated to. So towns like Randolph and Walden, and some of them are more, however they are made up in terms of their geography, but they're more suburban or more urban. But you've seen Boston Public Schools go to make, all their children who are middle school and higher take the T and take T buses. Their access is different. And also, when you're working in a town like Milton and you just pass an override, there's an expectation that this part of the school process was taken care of. So really being out there with what the priorities are that we're trying to achieve with our budget and identifying what we can do as a school district with the funds that we have to accommodate as many folks as possible. Within the ability to fund it is an ongoing conversation. And I'm not recommending that we don't transport students, that we don't have to. But some folks actually end up doing that in order to just take this budget expense off the plate and move it into the classroom because that's what they needed to do. I think our families expect a certain amount of transportation being part of their experience in the town of Milton.
Any other questions on? Oh, yeah, I think that's 9 of them. Great. All right, old old business, we can kind of push that to next week, discussion of report structure, because we're already at time here. New business was covered in the wonderful assistant superintendent report. Vote on meeting minutes. And is not here, so vote on it. So, were you?
I have no changes.
Okay.
I move to approve the minutes.
Yeah, I'll make the motion to approve the finance committee meeting minutes for June 11th, June 18th, August 6th, and August 11th.
Second.
Great, and all in favor? Our next meeting is scheduled for 2 weeks out, right? So we're on the 17th. Any then kind of the finance report, we can look back to that. I think we got pretty far in that discussion. I don't know if there's gonna be too much to discuss with that. But any other kind of topics you would like to cover? I think we can talk more about the, we can try and get some updates on the warrant committee coordination and we can talk about that. And we will have a, Nathan and I have a meeting with the finance budget coordination committee this Friday.
Yeah, we're ready.
Yeah, yeah. So, lucky y'all, I get to see me twice this week, 3 times. So we'll have that update as well.
Can I just put something on the table? Katie and I were talking about a finance committee calendar that we work with on the school committee side to try to anticipate the topics that we want to address. I think Katie's idea of having I'm going to call it a budget 101 chunk. It had every meeting or every other meeting that might be aligned with where we are in the budget season. So this transportation 101 is great. People can go back and watch it. If people want more detail, they can see the handout PowerPoint, so they can see the video. But Katie's idea of kind of doing something in terms of an educational moment for parts of the budget that we could use as a resource, I think is part of what we should think about. And also want to make sure that we include the really good idea, Mark, that you had about having a discussion about revolving accounts, at least a certain amount of revolving accounts that have real leverage points that we want to make sure we address for minimum balances. So we can use that as a tool when we're going to in front of folks around budgeting, why it's important to keep those minimums at a certain level, and just identifying those revolving accounts, identifying, what we think is a minimum balance that we would like to achieve, creating language, and then having that voting. So I think that's going to be a good tool for the overarching FY 27 conversation about why we're budgeting the way we are, and why we're using money to put in those important revolving accounts. Because as you can see, just in this conversation, the transportation account with the revolving account still didn't have enough money in it to run transportation. So that, absent any additional revenue that we were able to accrue just at the beginning of the year, we would have been upside down on transportation. We know that we're looking at community schools. Right now, that's not paying. The only reason why they're working year to year is because they had a balance that they're using to make it work. Athletics, facilities, so and certainly circuit breaker, which is sitting at an $8,000 balance. It should be between 2 million and 3 million. So having that discussion, I think, and we may be doing it in pieces that we will help coordinate. Maybe we talk about the first chunk, the second chunk in between now and October. We have some policies ready to go through the warrant committee and say this is why we're budgeting a certain way. I think that'll pay off greatly when we have these discussions with the so.
I think that also helps when we have the discussions around fees. Do you mean because the fee and it's like a fee discussion itself is sort of it's in the vacuum. But if you know that the goal is to have X amount of revolving fund or the why behind it helps you inform. Okay, is that enough? Is that if you need to increase? So I think that's great.
Yeah. Jamie, you look at athletics, that part of it, a good amount of their budget is transportation to get youth to games. So if that's going up by 5% a year, we already know that that's going up by 5%. And so it's just baking that in, I think, is a helpful tool. So we don't have to do that every year. If you have a healthy revolving account, that builds the offsets in, and you're able to maneuver. Maybe every 3 years you have to address those things because the revolving account can be that shock absorber that can let the fiscal years work while those expenses go up and down. And not too many to go down.
Great. If there's nothing else, then I will take a motion to adjourn. Will second, all in favor? Very much.
Thank you.